Hello, LifeGroup leaders. I'm Ken Gaines, and I'm going to bring the lesson to you this week. I'm going to do it a little bit different than I've done in the past. I felt like the last couple of times I kind of taught the lesson to you, and that's not really what you need. So basically just going to try to give some guidance and some talking points to you, and then let you do your study from there to prepare. We're going to be in session 2 of this quarterly's lesson. It's called If It Dies, and it comes from John 12:20 through 33. And so we need a little bit of context around these verses, and we're going to see today that's going to be very important. So when is this happening? This is happening at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Passover feast. Is about to happen. Palm Sunday's happened. Jesus has come into Jerusalem on the colt. And so that's where we're at, is in Jerusalem. And the circumstances that surround this are that Jesus has raised Lazarus. And because he raised Lazarus, many people believed in him. But there are others that still did not believe, and they went and told the chief priest and those that were the religious leaders and teachers what was happening, which incited them to not only want to kill Jesus, but to also want to kill Lazarus, because they decided that if they could kill Lazarus, then the proof of Jesus being who he said he was would not be there. So I can't imagine, someone's heart being that hardened, but that's where they were, and we know God was orchestrating all of this, because it had to happen. Jesus is going to talk about that in the lesson today. The other thing that's really interesting that you probably want to bring up in your class is this story, if I'm correct, does not appear in the other Gospels. And so, as a matter of fact, John's going to go on this 3 or 4 chapter discussion of things that are not really talked about in the other Gospels. They go from where we are right now, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, straight to the Last Supper and Gethsemane, and we're rolling on. John takes several chapters here to talk about his number one goal. Remember why he wrote his gospel. It was to show that Jesus was the Christ, the Messiah. And so the things that he thinks about, the things that he's writing about in his gospel at this time, are going to point to that leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection. So, some talking points here. Verse 21 says, So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Now these were Greeks, and so they were seeking Jesus out. And what's important about that is that they were not Jews. And so this reference here is a picture for us to show one of the things Jesus came to do, to unite us in brotherhood and sisterhood in Christ. Now in verse 23, when Jesus hears this, when they come and find Jesus and say, "Hey, these Greeks are looking for you," these non-Jews, Jesus knows his time is here. And so he says so, and he says, "My time has come to die for all." And he talks about that in verse 32. And that verse can get taken out of context a lot of times by different people. When Jesus says he had come to die for all, let's look at it, verse 32. In my Bible it says, "And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." That doesn't mean Jesus is going to save everyone on the planet at that time. What it means is, when he says all people, he means Jew and non-Jew, which had not been that way before. Before that time, they were still under the Mosaic law, and if you wanted to follow God and his plan, then basically you needed to become a Jew spiritually and religiously and follow the Mosaic law. And Jesus is saying that's not going to be the case anymore once this thing happens. So Jesus knows it's his time to come and die and make this pathway. He is the gate, the shepherd. We've talked a lot about that in previous lessons. And, it's starting to all roll downhill from here. In verse 24, Jesus begins to teach them about spiritual life. And he uses this metaphor of a grain of wheat. And so there are several points you may want to bring out in your class. One of them is, Jesus says several things here about you need to hate your worldly life. And those that lose their life will gain it. And so you may talk about, what does that mean? What does it mean to hate your worldly life? Because again, without some context and reading through this whole chapter here and knowing other parts of the Bible, these things could be taken out of context in a very negative way. So you have to really concentrate on what Jesus is saying here and what he means. He says, if you serve me, you will follow me. So you might talk to your class about what did that mean for them when he said that to them at this time? What did that mean to follow him? And then, what does that mean for us today? And is it different? In some ways, it probably is. In other ways, it's probably the same. And then, finally, instead of shirking away from death, Jesus says, this is why I'm here. This is the whole point of me being here, what's about to happen. And even though he says this here, they're not going to get it still. But, he's trying to prepare them and get them ready for this. And so when you talk about that, Jesus knew what his purpose was, and he was about to fulfill that. And so you can talk to your class about, why are we here? What is our purpose? And so that's a great discussion right there. And it's something really to reflect on personally for each one of us. Why are we here? What's our point? We're members of a family, we're members of a community, we're members of a church, we have a job, we may enjoy sports or extracurricular activities with other people and groups. What does it all mean, though? What is the point of us being here on the planet? And if you're a Christian, that's a very introspective answer there that we should probably meditate on more often than we do. Then in verse 30, Jesus is going to go into some talk about, the church age is upon us here. And there's lots of prophecies here that are being fulfilled. Jesus explains that this loud voice that the people heard was not for his sake, but for theirs. So again, he's trying to point out, hey, everything that's happened leading up to this, the priest being upset with me, you guys being here still seeking answers and wanting to learn from me and hear from me, all of it was designed way back in the Old Testament. He had ridden into town on the colt that had never been ridden. He was of David's lineage. He was born in Bethlehem. He had performed all these miracles, and now he was about to defeat Satan in death. And so, the sheep and the goats were being separated right here and right in front of us. It says, some believed and some didn't when he raised Lazarus. And that's just, again, I don't understand how you couldn't believe, but that's what was happening. And so that was going on, and the Gentiles were about to be grafted into God's family. And so that's a great point to talk about. And Jesus is alluding to that here when he talks about, he's about to be raised up, and then all are going to start seeking him, not just the Jews. He's not going to be, God the Father is not going to be the God of the Jews anymore. He's going to be the God of the saved. And that's going to happen through Jesus. And So really, that's the points I've got for you to talk about. It's really short this week. Again, it's interesting that a lot of what John's going to talk about in this chapter and the next 2 or 3 chapters aren't in the other Gospels very much, because, again, John's whole point when he's thinking about what's happening at this time as he writes this later, he's obviously, divinely inspired by God, but, his purpose in writing his Gospel is to show that Jesus was the Christ. And so all of these things about Jesus having this monologue with them and doing these things with them point to him being the Messiah. And that's what John's focus is. And so it's going to be some great lessons. I'm really looking forward to them. And hopefully that helps you get pointed in some directions that will be fruitful for your discussions this Sunday. And wish you luck. Thanks.